It's great to have dreams, just as long as you don't believe in them too much. Hello everyone, welcome to episode number 49 of Movies Are Awesome, the show all about cremation. My name is Nathan Pottle, and thank you for joining me today. 49th episode, next week, number 50. Very excited about that. I've got a fun topic lined up for that. Now, for today's topic, though, I was sitting and I was thinking what I wanted to talk about, and after spending some time figuring out what I wanted to talk about, I wanted to talk about character introductions, as the title of this episode suggests. But normally when I pick a topic, I will just pick the top 5 best examples of that one thing, and then just do a top 5 list and talk about those things. But I wanted today to be a little bit deeper and dive a little bit more in. So today, it's not so much a top 5 list of character introductions, it's more what is a good character introduction, how does it work, why does this first impression of a character mean so much, and where is it used really, really well, and where is it used poorly? So that's what today's episode is going to be about. I am going to get into some light spoilers on movies because I'm talking about character introductions. It's more about the first time you see a character in a movie, so generally that's not really spoiler heavy, because generally you'll meet a new character at the beginning of a movie, or at least part way through a movie. So I'm not worried about ruining big plot details for you guys. And most of these movies are pretty popular. I picked movies that are kind of bigger that people have definitely heard of. But I am very excited to talk about some character introductions here because I love movie characters, and there's so many great ones out there that are just so interesting and fascinating in the way that they think, and the things that they do are really cool. Or maybe they're kind of an evil character, but you still understand what they're about and what they're doing. So to really dive into this, I'm going to talk about, so what is the importance of introducing us to a character? So especially if the character is of special import to the story, you definitely want to do one of a few different things when introducing a character. Or sometimes you want to hit multiple of these things. But the biggest thing that you can do is let us know exactly who the character is without blatantly telling us, right? Giving us hints and clues that we kind of subconsciously see as who this character is. So I want to talk some examples about that. Now, Daniel Plainview is a character, he's the main character from the movie There Will Be Blood. If you have not seen There Will Be Blood, it is one of my absolute favorites. And what's really interesting about this character is that the first 15 minutes of this movie or so, the first 10 to 15 minutes, have absolutely no dialogue. It's all, you're just watching this character do things. Now, the story of There Will Be Blood is about this character, Daniel Plainview, and he is this oil tycoon who is just making all this money. He has a vast empire, and he is sweeping across the nation, and he's getting all the money and getting all the oil, and it's just about how he's taken over. And the very opening scene of the movie shows him in a mineshaft type thing, digging for oil by himself. This scene just shows his resilience. And you see again and again and again, he comes up against a problem and he solves it and he overcomes it. And that is what is at the core of the character of Daniel Plainview, is that he is just so determined. He has goals in mind and he is going after them, and he won't stop until he gets what he's after. He's just such a determined individual, and it even shows the adoption of his son. He comes across a family who's not able to take care of their kids anymore, and he adopts this little boy, and he's just determined to raise him right and determined to give him a very good life. And there's just such determination. I feel like I'm saying that word a lot, but that is really what's at the core of this character. And then as the movie goes on, you'll see that his determination knows no bounds, and there's no line that he won't cross in order to get what he wants. And that's really central to this character. And I don't want to say more because I feel a lot of people don't know this movie as much. So with Daniel Plainview, you just want to go into that movie, watch those first 10 or 15 minutes of where he's just not even saying anything, and then you get into the real story, when he first starts speaking, he's at a like a town hall meeting type deal, and he's talking to this town about how that there's oil there, and he's wanting them to invest so that he can begin drilling, and they get money, he gets money, everybody wins, and then the story continues on from there. So that's a really good example of showing us who the character is without being too obvious and bashing us over the head. There are lots of great examples of this happening in movies. Another really good one is Hans Landa, who is the main villain character for Inglourious Basterds. And his introductory scene is the very opening scene of the movie, where he's trying to find some Jewish people who are in hiding because he is a Nazi officer and that is his job. His nickname is the Jew Hunter. And they kind of go through this back and forth, him and this farmer. And they're talking about milk. Like, he owns a milk farm, and Hans Landa is just drinking milk, and they're having a conversation in French, and they're switching languages, and this scene is absolutely brilliant. If you watched my best opening scenes episode, and not watched, if you listened to my best opening scenes video, that sounds a little bit better. If you listened to that episode, this opening scene with Hans Landa was on my list of top 5 opening scenes to a movie, because I think it's just such a wonderful introduction to this villainous character. Like, he is smart, and he is conniving, and he knows, like, everything. You can't get something past this guy. And I think that this opening scene really drives home the point that he knows what's up, and you can't beat him. He's an unbeatable villain, basically. And the performance by Christopher Walker? No. What's his name? Christoph Waltz is his name, not Christopher Walken, or whoever I'm trying to say. Christoph Waltz's performance is phenomenal in this movie. He did win an Academy Award for his performance. It's also worth noting that Daniel Plainview was played by Daniel Day-Lewis, who also won an Academy Award for that performance. It's probably my favorite performance in a movie ever, by the way. But this introduction to Hans Landa is different in the way that Daniel Plainview's character is introduced, because they are having a dialogue, having a conversation, and through the things that Hans Landa is saying and how he's kind of controlling and directing the conversation, it gives us insight into who the character is and how he thinks and what his goals and ambitions are in life. So that's another really great example of showing us who the character is. Another good one, it's kind of a more fun one, is Jack Sparrow in the first Pirates of the Caribbean movie, Curse of the Black Pearl. When we first see his character, he's on a little dinghy boat, and he's this pirate, and he has respect for other pirates because he sees some pirates who are hung or hanged. I always confuse them. Is it hung or is it hanged? I have no idea. Either way, they're dead on a rope. And he takes off his hat in respect for them. But then you see that his boat is sinking, and he kind of rides the sinking boat into the dock, and that's how we're introduced to this character. And then he has an interaction with the dockmaster, who he bribes to let him leave his sunk boat on the dock, and then immediately robs him. So Jack Sparrow is a character who is kind of fun, kind of goofy, but at the same time, he's gonna take your money, and it doesn't matter to him. So that's another fun one of showing us kind of who this character is, and a really great one. Here's one more before I move on to kind of a different topic of character introductions, is The Godfather. So in the very opening scene of The Godfather, we're not even focused on Vito Corleone. We're focused on a guy who is coming to him for help. And he's telling a story about how he's American, and he loves being American, an Italian American. He follows the law, and the law failed him in some respect because his daughter got beat up, and now he's coming to the Godfather for help. And the Godfather's just sitting there and listening to this story, and the look on his face is he seems kind of impatient with this guy. And when he finally starts talking, he's asking, why did you go to the police? Why didn't you come straight to me? And that shows us right there, like, this guy is the head of a mob family. And this cements that in for us, showing no. If you have a problem, you don't go to the police, you come to me. I will fix your problems, and there won't be Like, it's not, there's no bureaucratic red tape or anything. Like, I'm just going to get the job done. So it's interesting in that respect that we're having someone talk to our character. And these are just like 4 different characters here and 4 different ways to introduce them. But by the end of the introductory scene, we know who these characters are and what they're all about. I'm going to switch tracks a little bit here. Another thing that's really important with introducing characters and kind of showing us who they are, you also want to do it in a way that's unique, especially if your character is unique. And it sounds like I'm talking about like villainous characters a lot, and I think it's because when it comes to a villain, you can be a lot more creative and have a lot more fun with introducing a character. But Silva, who is the villain in Skyfall, one of the James Bond movies, it's directed by Sam Mendes, who also recently directed 1917, and I loved 1917. But in any case, like going back, Silva's introduction is really, really good. So he comes out of an elevator, and the shot is James Bond is in the foreground, and Silva's way in the background coming out of the elevator, and he introduces himself. He says like, "Hello, James Bond," and then he starts talking about a story from his childhood with his grandmother. And he just jumps right into this story talking about rats who are on the island and how they were able to capture all the rats and made them not a pest problem anymore because they turned the rats into cannibals and now they're not a problem anymore. And this story is so reflective of Silva's life, and it also kind of sets us up to what to expect for the rest of the movie and kind of what his motives are and how he's going to proceed forward. It's also just in general a really interesting story, and this introduction is just all in one shot. So when he comes out of the elevator, way in the background, he's slowly walking up. And by the time his story is over, he's standing right in front of James Bond, and he's taking up almost the entire frame at this point. And you haven't even really noticed that it's all one shot, that he's slowly coming in, because you're already so captivated by him and you're interested in what he has to say. Like, he has this charisma to him that you just can't help but listen, and you're not even really paying attention to the visual aspect of the shot. And it's a beautiful shot when you're looking back on it the second or third time. So I think this character introduction is really strong, and it's really unique in the way that it's done. Another villain introduction that is also kind of unique is the opening of The Dark Knight with the Joker. So they're doing this bank heist. They're robbing a mob bank, and the guys who are robbing the bank all have clown masks, and they're killing each other off throughout the heist. And then slowly, when you get to the end of the heist, it's revealed that one of them is the Joker, and he's the guy who hasn't been talking much, but you don't know he hasn't been talking because he just, because they're all wearing masks, you can't tell which one's talking or not. At least I have difficulty determining which character is talking and which one's not. After seeing the movie a bunch of times, I kind of know who's saying what now at this point. But initially, when you're first watching it, you're seeing that, one guy is being silent, because, if you count out the voices and see the guys. And when he finally reveals himself, then oh, I'm the Joker, I'm the one who hired you, and I've also killed all of you, and I'm just taking all the money for myself. That is really interesting, and it's really unique, and I like it a whole lot. And that's even just besides the fact that Heath Ledger's Joker is a wonderful, marvelous, groundbreaking performance, and he's just the heart and soul of that movie. Even that aside, this introduction to him doesn't even have to do with his performance at all, because everyone else who's talking about the Joker is not him. They're mentioning that he wears clown makeup, and they mention that he's kind of ruthless, and they mention that he just kind of does whatever he wants. And then the first thing he says, "Whatever doesn't kill you simply makes you stranger." And then he takes off his mask and he reveals who he is, and he gets away with all of this mob money. That is a really good, strong character introduction, just because it's so impactful and it's memorable, right? You remember that opening scene of The Dark Knight. Do you remember them being on the 2 boats at the end of the movie as much? No. And like that's one of my complaints with The Dark Knight is I think the movie's a little bit too long. By the time we get to the two boats, I'm ready for the movie to be over. But that opening scene really sets the stage for a fascinating crime drama. It's not even a superhero movie at this point, it's a crime drama. And a really good one at that. So that introduction of the Joker, marvelous, fantastic. And another really unique introduction, before I have another kind of topic that I want to talk about, is the introduction of Indiana Jones. So in Raiders of the Lost Ark, which came out in the 1980s, the opening scene is Indiana Jones leading some explorers through the jungle, and you're watching him do all these different things. He's like examining paths and he's triggering traps and he has his whip, but you never see his face. You're just watching the things that he does. This is also another scene that doesn't have any dialogue. You're just watching things happen. And as you're watching it happen, you're like, hey, this guy is smart. This guy is an adventurer. This guy is a kind of badass. And it all leads up to the really good scene of him and Alfred Molina going through the temple to get the idol of the fertility goddess at the very beginning of the movie. And you have the giant round boulder that comes down after him. That whole scene is just magnificent. And the introduction to Indiana Jones as a character, it's so memorable. It's so unique. Oh my goodness. I want to watch that movie now because it's such a wonderful movie. I find that I do that a lot when I start talking about movies on the show here that really resonate with me and movies that I enjoy quite a bit. I find that I'm wanting to go and rewatch them. And unfortunately, that's not something I always have the time for. There's a lot of new movies I got to check out and watch. But last night, I rewatched Knives Out. So this is the second time that I've seen it. It's just as good as the first time. Knives Out is a magnificent film. But I'm letting myself get distracted here. So back to the introduction of Indiana Jones is you have a couple of guys who are talking to him and his interactions with Alfred Molina. And he's just, like, this is a guy who just knows what's up. He is really smart in his field of archaeology. They're going into this ancient temple, and he's got it figured out. He's in control. He is just the man, you know? And then he makes a mistake with the amount of sand that he switches with the idol, and it triggers the traps, but he still gets out. He has to make a deal like, throw me the idol, I'll throw you the whip. And so they do that, and then he gets out. But that's a really good introduction, and it also shows that the character isn't 100% infallible. Like, he does make mistakes, and Indiana Jones makes a lot of mistakes in that movie. He's not a clean-cut, like, perfect hero, and I think that's what's really interesting about Indiana Jones as a character overall, is that, like, he's always getting beat down, and he's quite often getting outsmarted by other people, or he's making mistakes. And I think that's what one of the big drawbacks is of the newest Indiana Jones movie, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, is that even though he's like way older, he's like way more in control, and he like never messes up and never makes a mistake, and he's just like this perfect being even though he's an old man. So that's one of the many problems I have with that movie. And they just recently announced that a new Indiana Jones movie is going to be directed by James Mangold, not by Steven Spielberg. If you're not familiar with James Mangold, he made Logan as well as Ford versus Ferrari last year. We're still close enough to 2019 that I call it this year, but it was last year. I haven't seen Ford versus Ferrari. I heard it was a very good though. It's on my list of movies to watch. Okay, one more thing I want to talk about is when you're introducing a character, I said you gotta be unique in the way you're introducing the character, so it's memorable for us in our minds as audience members. When you're introducing a character, you want to show us who the character is, so that we are introduced to them and we kind of have a feel whether we like this person or not. And another thing that you want to do is, if you're not showing us who the character is, you want to give us like an air of mystery, right? Like, who is this person? Why do we want to know more? Like, give us something interesting to bring us in. Or if you're not creating an air of mystery, you want to leave room for a character arc. Like, show us a very obvious flaw in this character that they can then overcome. So for a character arc, a really good example is in the 2009 reboot of Star Trek, the opening scene of James T. Kirk when he's a little boy. He steals his stepdad's car and like goes on a joyride. And it's fun, and he plays the Beastie Boys, and it's a fun scene. But it also shows us that he's very brash. He just does whatever he wants, and he doesn't care about like consequences or anything. He lets the car drive over a cliff, and he jumps out of the car like at the very last minute. Like he almost dies from it. So he just has no regard for his own safety or other people's safety. And that's kind of the journey that he goes on through the movie of like learning to trust other people, being part of a team, and like learning to be a leader and having other people, like being responsible for other people. And I think that's a huge part of Captain Kirk's story arc in that 2009 Star Trek. And it's really well established in that opening scene of like, this is a guy who will do whatever he wants, and it doesn't matter how other people are affected. But by the end of the movie, he has like real authority, and he has to take ownership of that and really understand what it means to be a captain of a starship. That was the only one that I could really think of like a strong introduction to a character arc. But I have two very good examples of characters that like have mystery to them. So the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan is this ridiculous war scene when they're storming the beach in World War II. And this scene is crazy. But it introduces us to Captain Miller, who is played by Tom Hanks. And the very first thing you see of this character is his hand shaking. And he's like grabbing his water canteen, and he's like shaking as he's taking a drink. And he has this quiver in his hand. And he's not saying anything, and we're not really shown much else about the character other than this is like a guy who's kind of in charge in the army. He's got authority over people, but he's got this tremor in his hand. And what is up with that? What is going on with that tremor in his hand? Is it just like jitters from the war, or is it some kind of injury that he has, or some kind of deformity that's causing his hand to shake like that? And then as the movie goes on, we get more and more mystery from him. Like nobody knows what he does, like outside of the army. Like what is his job back home? Nobody knows. There's actually a pool that was started where people are betting money trying to see who's right on what his occupation is back home. So that's really good mystery, and I think the payoff in that movie is really good. I love Saving Private Ryan. It's definitely one of the best movies of the 1990s, probably not the best. I'm wanting to maybe do episodes of like movies by the decade and like really good decade-defining movies. Probably won't do that until like farther down the line though, but I think that's a fun idea for a series of episodes. If you think that's a cool idea, please let me know, and maybe I'll do it sooner than I thought. But one more character with mystery now. This is like the biggest mystery of movie mysteries of all time. The very opening scene of Citizen Kane, where you have Charles Foster Kane. He is an old man at the end of his life, and we see him at the very end of his life, and the opening scene of the movie is him dying, and he utters one final word, Rosebud. And he drops a snow globe, and the snow globe breaks, and he dies. Isn't that just so pitch perfect? I might not be describing it well enough, but if you watch Citizen Kane, the opening scene of that movie, you're just like, who is this guy? Why is he living in this massive, massive house? What's the snow globe? And what is Rosebud? And that's like the whole movie. What does Rosebud mean? Why was this his last word? Why did he utter it? What? And the journalist who is doing like an expose on Charles Foster Kane's life is trying to figure that out. And not only is he trying to figure out what Rosebud means, he's trying to just see what kind of man was Charles Foster Kane in his entire life. Like, what led him to do the things that he did throughout his life? And oh my goodness, that is such an incredible, incredible movie. It's like not even on any other movie's level. Like, I think it definitely is one of the best movies ever made. A lot of people feel it is like the top number one best movie ever made, and it's definitely up there. Now, I will admit it's not in my top 10 favorite movies ever, but I can at least acknowledge and realize that this is such a well-made movie and such a well-told story, and the introduction to this character, I implore you to check out Citizen Kane if you have not seen it. It is such an incredible movie. It did come out in the 1940s, but don't let that stop you. It's in black and white. Don't let that stop you. It's just wonderful. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm kind of starting to wrap everything up here. So when it comes to character introduction, so that first impression is very important. You want to be unique. You want to show us who the character is. You want to give us room for a story arc. You want to give us some mystery. Now, there are definitely ways of introducing characters that are just so ineffective and not good at all. I took a little bit of time to think about some characters that were introduced very, very poorly. Now, obviously, everything about Suicide Squad is awful. It's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. It's really very bad. If you enjoy it, that's wonderful. I'm happy for you, but it's hot garbage. And one of the many, many, many problems that I have with Suicide Squad is how it introduces their characters. Now, literally, it puts the camera on the character and you see them standing there, and literally a scroll of text comes along the screen showing you the character's interests and showing you their goals and showing you their motivation and showing you the reason that they were imprisoned and all of these different things. It's literally just scrolling text of who the character is and what's important to them and what kind of possible story arc they're going to have, if any. Almost none of the characters have story arcs in that movie because nothing in that movie makes sense and everything about it is stupid. Frustrates me that instead of just scrolling text, you could have just had a little scene with each of the characters. Now, another example of bad character introductions that I have is in a movie that's similar, but actually much better. In Guardians of the Galaxy, we have a little scene where they talk about each of the characters as they're going into prison, and it just kind of fills in the blanks for us. And that's not good either. It's a little bit better than Suicide Squad because it's people talking instead of just text scrolling across the screen, but it's still bad. It's no good. I'm all frustrated now. I'm all upset. But at least at the opening of Guardians of the Galaxy, we had the scene with Peter Quill and his mom, and then it cuts to him dancing around on the planet before he steals the orb that has the Power Stone in it. So at least it has that before it gets to that scene, and it gives us some introduction to the characters that way. But in Suicide Squad, just what were they thinking? I don't think they were thinking at all. Not for a second were they thinking about anything when they made that movie. It is just the absolute worst. I think that's it though. I don't want to talk about bad examples anymore, and that's as I've said multiple times on the show here, I want to keep this podcast primarily positive about the great things about movies, how movies are truly awesome. And so talking about Suicide Squad every now and then is fine, but I don't want to rant about it all the time, even though it is horrible. So before I wrap up the show, I just want to ask you, what is your favorite character introduction in a movie? If I have to pick one, I probably am going to pick Daniel Plainview from There Will Be Blood. But please let me know what your favorite character introduction is. You can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter @PoddleNathan and on Instagram @PoddleProductions. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. If you like the show, you can subscribe to it. You can find it on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and a whole bunch of other places. I really appreciate those of you who listen to the show every week. It's really great. It warms my heart. And if you have nothing else to do, go watch more movies.